The grand charity gala was the event of the year, glittering chandeliers, expensive champagne, and the city's wealthiest socialites dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. Among the guests was a well-known businessman, a black CEO who had built his empire from the ground up. He wasn't just respected, he was admired for his humility despite his success. That night, he had brought his mother, a kind-hearted woman who had sacrificed everything for her son's future. Near the entrance, a wealthy socialite, known for her sharp tongue and sense of entitlement, held court with her usual crowd. She was the type who believed money made her superior to others. As the CEO and his mother walked past, the older woman accidentally brushed against the socialite's expensive dress. The socialite's face twisted in disgust. "Ugh, watch where you're going," she snapped, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Then, with a sneer, she added, "Some people just don't belong in places like this." The room fell silent. The CEO's mother, though embarrassed, simply offered a quiet apology. But her son's expression darkened. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You will apologize to my mother. Now." The socialite laughed, flipping her hair. "Or what? You'll throw your money at me? Please, you're just another." Before she could finish, the CEO did something no one expected. He turned to the event organizer and said, "Cancel my donation. I'll be taking my $5 million elsewhere." Gasps filled the room. The charity gala's biggest sponsor was walking away, all because of one woman's arrogance. The organizer paled. The socialite's smug expression faltered. But that was just the beginning. As whispers spread, another guest, a powerful media mogul, stepped forward. "If he's leaving, so am I." Then another. And another. Within minutes, the event was crumbling, all because the socialite had insulted the wrong person. Outside, the CEO helped his mother into their car. She looked at him with sadness. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to cause trouble." He squeezed her hand. "You didn't." She did. Meanwhile, inside, the socialite was realizing the gravity of her mistake. The guests who once laughed at her jokes were now avoiding her. The event staff glared. And the organizer? He had one thing to say: "Get out." But the fallout was far from over. Because the next day, the story exploded online. By morning, the incident at the charity gala had spread like wildfire. A guest had recorded the socialite's cruel remarks and the CEO's powerful response, posting it online with the caption, "Wealthy woman insults black CEO's mom, watch what happens next." The video went viral within hours. Comments flooded in, thousands of people expressing outrage. Who does she think she is? That CEO handled it like a king. Disgusting behavior from someone who claims to be high class. The socialite, used to being admired, woke up to a storm. Her phone buzzed non-stop, angry messages, reporters asking for statements, and worst of all, notifications from brands she had partnered with. "We no longer wish to be associated with your brand. Contract terminated." One by one, her sponsorship deals vanished. The luxury fashion label she represented dropped her. The jewelry brand she endorsed publicly distanced itself. Even the charity she had patronied for years released a statement condemning her behavior. Panic set in. She called her publicist, screaming, "Fix this. Do something." But the damage was done. Meanwhile, the CEO stayed silent. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post about the incident. He simply went back to work, focusing on his business, his employees, and most importantly, his mother. But the world wasn't done talking. A popular talk show host aired a segment about the incident, calling it a perfect example of why money doesn't buy class. Memes mocking the socialite popped up everywhere. Hashtags like #cancel her and #respect the CEO trended for days. Then came the final blow. A major business magazine reached out to the CEO for an exclusive interview. At first, he declined. But when they asked if he'd speak about his journey, how he went from nothing to building an empire, he agreed. The interview was explosive. He spoke about his childhood, growing up in a rough neighborhood, watching his mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. He talked about the racism he faced early in his career, the people who told him he'd never succeed. And then, with quiet pride, he shared how his mother's strength kept him going. "She taught me that respect isn't about money or status. It's about how you treat people," he said. The article went viral too, but this time, for all the right reasons. Readers praised his humility, his resilience, and most of all, his love for his mother. Back in her penthouse, the socialite watched the interview with shaking hands. For the first time in her life, she felt small. And the worst part? She knew this wasn't the end. Because the CEO hadn't just won the public's respect. He had set something bigger in motion. The magazine interview had done more than just humanize the CEO, it had exposed the deep cracks in the socialite's carefully crafted image. People weren't just angry at what she had done, they were disgusted by who she had done it to. As the CEO's story spread, details emerged that made the situation even more explosive. Years before he built his empire, the CEO had been a young college graduate struggling to land a job. Despite his degree, recruiters would take one look at him and make excuses. "We're looking for someone with more experience. You wouldn't fit the culture here." One interviewer had even told him outright, "People like you don't usually succeed in this industry." But he refused to give up. He took unpaid internships, worked late nights, and swallowed every insult, all while his mother prayed for his success. When he finally started his own company, he made sure to lift others up with him. His employees adored him because he remembered what struggle felt like. And now, the world understood why that socialite's words had cut so deep. Meanwhile, the socialite's PR team had scrambled to draft a damage control statement. They posted it on her social media, a carefully worded apology that reeked of insincerity. "I regret if my words were misinterpreted. At the gala, emotions were high, and I never intended to offend anyone." The internet exploded. Misinterpreted? She told a sweet old lady she didn't belong there. This isn't an apology, it's a slap in the face. She still doesn't get it. Even celebrities began calling her out. A famous singer tweeted, "When you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And accountability feels like an attack." Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse for the socialite, an unexpected figure entered the scene, her own father. A retired business tycoon, he had stayed silent during the scandal. But when reporters caught up with him at a private event, his words stunned everyone. "I raised her better than this," he said, shaking his head. "Money means nothing if you have no character. And right now, my daughter has shown none." The media went wild. Even her family was disowning her. While chaos swirled around the socialite, the CEO remained focused. But he wasn't done yet. At a private meeting with his board, he made an announcement. "We're launching a new initiative, a scholarship in my mother's name. For single parents and first-generation students who've been told they don't belong." The room erupted in applause. When news of the scholarship broke, donations poured in, not just from supporters, but from some of the same wealthy elites who had once turned a blind eye to the socialite's behavior. Alone in her penthouse, the socialite stared at her reflection. For the first time in her life, the designer clothes, the expensive art, the Instagram followers, none of it mattered. She had lost everything. Her reputation. Her endorsements. Even her family's respect. And the worst part? She had done it to herself. The socialite sat alone in her penthouse, the silence pressing in on her like a weight. Her phone buzzed incessantly, angry messages, reporters demanding comments, former friends pretending to check in just to gossip. She ignored them all. For the first time in her life, she had no idea what to do next. Her publicist, the only one still willing to work with her, had set up an emergency meeting. "You need to do a real apology," the publicist said firmly. "Not some PR statement. A raw, emotional video where you take full responsibility." The socialite scoffed. "And humiliate myself even more? Right now, the world thinks you're a spoiled bully who doesn't care. The only way out is to show them you're human." After hours of arguing, she finally agreed. The video was filmed in her home, no makeup, no designer clothes, just her in a simple sweater, looking exhausted. "I was wrong," she said, voice shaking. "What I said was cruel, and there's no excuse for it. I was arrogant, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to apologize, truly, to the CEO and his mother." She posted it and waited. At first, the response was mixed. Some people appreciated the honesty. Others called it too little, too late. But then, something unexpected happened. A former classmate of hers came forward with a story. "Back in school, she wasn't always like this," the classmate said in an interview. "She used to be kind. Then her family got richer, and she changed. I think she forgot who she really was." The comment sparked a new wave of discussion. Was she truly a villain, or just someone who got lost in her own privilege? The CEO, still silent on the matter, was busy with his new scholarship program. But when a reporter asked him about the socialite's apology, he paused. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow," he said simply. His words went viral. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were merciful. Just as the socialite thought she might survive the storm, disaster struck. An anonymous source leaked old emails from her early 20s, messages filled with entitled rants, racist remarks, and cruel jokes about people less wealthy than her. The internet erupted again. She didn't change. She just got caught. This is who she really is. Her father, who had already distanced himself, cut her off completely. "I won't fund this kind of behavior," he told her coldly. With her reputation in ruins and her trust fund frozen, the socialite did something she never thought she'd do. She called the one person who might still help her. Her older sister, the black sheep of the family, who had walked away from their wealth years ago to teach in underprivileged schools. "I don't know what to do," the socialite admitted, voice breaking. Her sister sighed. "Then maybe it's time you learned." While the socialite's world crumbled, the CEO faced his own surprise. A major international corporation reached out with an offer, an exclusive partnership worth millions. But there was a catch. "We want you to represent us globally," their rep said. "But we need to know, can you handle the spotlight without letting it change you?" The CEO smiled. "The spotlight doesn't change you. It just shows who you already are." As the socialite packed her bags to stay with her sister, away from the luxury she'd always known, the CEO prepared for his biggest opportunity yet. One had been humbled. The other, elevated. But their stories weren't over yet. The socialite stepped out of the taxi onto a cracked sidewalk, her designer luggage looking absurdly out of place in the modest neighborhood. Her sister's apartment building loomed before her, no doorman, no marble lobby, just peeling paint and the distant sound of children playing. She took a deep breath, the weight of her situation crashing down on her. This wasn't just damage control anymore, this was survival. Inside the cramped apartment, her sister didn't offer false comfort. "You'll sleep on the couch," she said simply, pushing aside lesson plans from the kitchen table. "First thing tomorrow, you're coming to school with me." The next morning came too soon. As they entered the underfunded high school where her sister taught, the socialite flinched at the stairs. Whispers followed her down the hallway, "That's her. From the video." She kept her head down, hands trembling. Her sister threw her straight into the deep end. "You're assisting in the cafeteria today." The lunchroom was chaos, shouting kids, sticky floors, the smell of cheap food. When a teenager bumped into her, spilling juice on her last clean designer blouse, she opened her mouth to snap, then stopped. The girl's worn sneakers and too small backpack caught her eye. For the first time, she saw something beyond the surface. Meanwhile, the CEO sat in a gleaming boardroom halfway across the city, signing the biggest deal of his career. His mother beamed with pride from the front row. But as the cameras flashed, he noticed something odd. The corporate executives kept exchanging glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Their handshakes felt just a little too tight, their smiles a fraction too wide. Back at the school, the socialite was given her first real task, tutoring a struggling freshman. The boy glared at her. "Why should I listen to you? You're that rich bitch from TV." The word stung, but she took a shaky breath. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been awful. But maybe we can both try something new today?" Days passed in uncomfortable routine. The socialite woke up with aching muscles from the thin couch. She learned to pack lunches, grade papers, and most surprisingly, to listen. The student stories crept under her skin, the single mom working nights to keep her kid in school, the undocumented immigrant terrified of deportation, the foster kid who slept in the library between shifts. One afternoon, as she helped a student fill out college applications, the girl asked quietly, "Why are you really here?" The socialite paused, then gave the most honest answer she could. "Because I finally realized money can't buy what actually matters." At that same moment, the CEO was discovering his own hard truth. Going over the fine print of his new contract, his lawyer pointed out disturbing clauses, requirements that would force him to cut programs for disadvantaged employees, demands that went against everything he stood for. "They're trying to make you compromise your values," the lawyer warned. That night, the socialite found her sister crying over a student's file, a bright senior who couldn't afford college deposits. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone. "I still have some contacts at scholarship foundations," she said. "Let me try to help." The CEO sat alone in his office late into the night, staring at the contract. His phone buzzed, his mother calling. "Whatever you choose," she said softly, "I'm proud of you." He knew then what he had to do. The next morning, both would make decisions that would shock everyone watching their stories unfold. One would walk away from power to keep her soul. The other would risk everything to stand by his principles. And neither realized their paths were about to collide in the most unexpected way. The socialite stood frozen in the school office, her sister's shocked expression mirroring her own. The email on the screen glowed with impossible words: "Your application for the Ramirez Scholarship has been approved." Below it, the funding amount made her knees weak, enough to cover not just deposits but 4 full years for the struggling student. "Who did you call?" her sister whispered. The socialite swallowed hard. "The one person I thought would never answer." She didn't elaborate as she rushed to tell the student, watching the girl's eyes fill with tears that cracked something open in her own chest. Across town, the CEO slammed his office phone down so hard his assistant jumped. "They actually thought I'd sign this?" The amended contract from his new partners might as well have been a betrayal in bold print, all his mentorship programs gutted, diversity initiatives reduced to token gestures. His mother's warning echoed in his mind: when money asks you to abandon your people, that's not success, that's slavery in a silk suit. That evening, 2 simultaneous explosions rocked the city's social media. First, the CEO's viral post announcing he was walking away from the multi-million-dollar deal. "Some bridges need to be burned so you don't forget where home is." Attached was a photo of him back in his old neighborhood, painting a community center alongside employees from every level of his company. Second, a leaked video showing the socialite in her sister's kitchen, hair in a messy bun, passionately arguing with a scholarship foundation director. "Don't tell me what's impossible. That girl deserves dash. The clip cut off as she slammed her palm on the table, rattling mugs. The internet lost its collective mind. Comments flooded in. Is this the same woman from the gala? That CEO just gave up how much money? What alternate universe are we in? At the community center, a reporter shoved a microphone in the CEO's face. Why throw away this opportunity? Sweat streaked his forehead as he rolled paint onto the wall. Real opportunities don't require you to lose yourself. Meanwhile, the socialite found herself cornered by students in the school hallway. Is it true you got Maria the scholarship? One demanded. Before she could answer, the girl threw her arms around her. The socialite stiffened, then hugged back fiercely, her expensive perfume mixing with the scent of cheap laundry detergent. That night, both received unexpected messages. The CEO's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Heard what you did. There's people who want to back the real you. The socialite stared at an email from the Scholarship Foundation director. However unorthodox your methods, you were right. Let's talk about expanding this program. As dawn broke, neither knew their separate journeys were about to intersect in the most explosive way imaginable. Because in 48 hours, they'd both be invited to the same live televised forum on second chances and corporate responsibility, and the producer had just decided to seat them right next to each other. The stage was set. The cameras were ready. And this time, the whole world would be watching what happened when these two faces of the same scandal came face to face again, both fundamentally changed, both with everything to prove. Somewhere in the city, a television executive smiled at the ratings projections. This wasn't just must-see TV anymore. This was history in the making. The studio lights burned hotter than the socialite remembered. She sat stiffly in her chair, fingers digging into her knees as makeup artists dusted her face with powder. The green room buzzed with producers and crew, but all sound faded when the door swung open. The CEO walked in. Their eyes locked, the first time they'd seen each other since that disastrous gala. His gaze held no anger now, just quiet assessment. She opened her mouth, but the floor director's voice crackled through her earpiece. Places in 2. The moment shattered. On set, the host beamed at the cameras. Tonight, a conversation about redemption and responsibility. The audience applauded as the spotlights found them, the disgraced socialite in a simple navy dress, the CEO in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, no tie in sight. The first question hit like a punch. Do either of you regret how this all began? The CEO answered first. Regret implies I'd change it. He leaned forward. That night exposed truths people needed to see. All eyes turned to the socialite. The studio lights reflected off the lenses of dozens of phones recording her every twitch. She inhaled shakily. I regret that it took public humiliation to make me see myself clearly. The raw honesty in her voice silenced the room. But no, I wouldn't erase it. The person I was that night deserved to fall. The host blinked, thrown off script. And who are you now? She surprised herself by laughing softly. Someone who knows what a cafeteria tray tastes like after a week in the microwave. The audience chuckled nervously. Someone whose learned privilege isn't just wealth, it's never having to see people you've hurt. A producer offstage frantically gestured at the CEO. This wasn't the catfight they'd promised advertisers. The CEO studied her for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He reached over and poured her a glass of water from the set carafe. The simple act of kindness sent social media into meltdown. Twitter exploded with hashtag he poured the water memes. The host, sensing gold, abandoned his cards. What would you say to each other now? Silence stretched. The socialite's hands trembled around her glass. The CEO spoke first. Thank you. The studio gasped. He continued, voice steady. Your cruelty that night became a mirror for thousands. Because of you, companies are auditing their diversity policies. Because of you, my mother's scholarship fund has doubled. He tilted his head. Funny how the universe works. The socialite's eyes shone wet under the lights. When she spoke, her voice barely carried. I'm trying to become someone worthy of your forgiveness. The CEO shook his head. Don't do it for me. Do it for those kids at that school. A producer's scream from backstage pierced the moment. The show's ratings had just surpassed the season finale of a hit reality series. The host, now fully off script, asked the question on everyone's mind, where do you both go from here? The CEO smiled. Back to work. My employees are painting a women's shelter this weekend. He glanced at the socialite. We could use extra hands. The invitation hung in the air. The audience held its breath. She met his gaze. What time should I be there? The studio erupted. As they walked off set together, the CEO's phone buzzed. Another corporation wanted to partner, this time on his terms. The socialite's sister texted, the kids saw you. They're crying. In a good way. Neither noticed the camera still rolling as they paused by the exit. The socialite hesitated, then extended her hand. The CEO took it, then pulled her into a brief, unexpected hug. Somewhere in the control room, a director whispered, we just made television history. But the real history was being written beyond the cameras, in the lives they'd each chosen to touch, and the unexpected second chances that sometimes come when we least deserve them. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Because tomorrow, they'd both wake up to find the world looking at them differently. And this time, they were ready. The morning after the interview, the socialite woke before dawn in her sister's cramped apartment. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains as she stared at the cracked ceiling, half expecting the previous night to have been a dream. But her phone told a different story, hundreds of notifications, interview requests, and a single surprising message from the CEO's assistant, painting starts at 8. Address attached. She arrived early, wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. The women's shelter stood weathered but proud, its peeling walls waiting for new life. The CEO was already there, sleeves rolled up, stirring a can of paint. He glanced up as she approached. No cameras today, he said. Just work. She nodded, picking up a brush. Just work. As they painted side by side, something unexpected happened, the tension dissolved. They talked about the shelter's residents, about the students at her sister's school, about anything except the scandal that had brought them here. For the first time, they were simply two people trying to do something good. By noon, a crowd had gathered. Not reporters, but locals, some curious, some wanting to help. A woman from the shelter brought out lemonade, her eyes bright with gratitude. You don't know what this means to us, she told them. The socialite's throat tightened. I think I'm starting to. Meanwhile, the world was watching. Clips of their quiet teamwork spread online, overshadowing the drama of the interview. A major news outlet ran the headline, Redemption looks like this. That evening, as they cleaned brushes, the CEO finally broke the silence between them. You know they'll never stop analyzing us. She wiped paint from her hands. I know. Does it bother you? She considered this. Not as much as the thought of going back to who I was. He studied her, really looked at her, for the first time. The perfectly manicured socialite was gone. In her place stood someone with calloused hands and paint in her hair. Someone real. You're different, he said. She smiled faintly. So are you. And he was. The CEO who'd walked away from millions moved differently now, lighter, as if he'd shed a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. As they parted ways that night, he surprised them both by saying, We're rebuilding the community center next week. You should come. She surprised herself even more by answering, I will. Weeks passed. The media frenzy died down, replaced by genuine change. The socialite became a regular volunteer, using her connections to secure donations and supplies. The CEO's foundation flourished, his integrity attracting partners who shared his vision. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves alone at the community center, taking shelter from a sudden downpour. The socialite laughed as she wiped rain from her face. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be here." The CEO handed her a towel. "Life's funny that way." She grew serious. "I need you to know, I'm not doing this for good PR or to fix my image. I know how." He gestured to the freshly painted walls around them. Because the woman from the gala would never have gotten paint under her nails. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Outside, the city continued its endless hustle. But in that moment, something quiet and profound passed between them, not forgiveness, exactly, but something perhaps more valuable, mutual respect. As they stepped back into the world, neither knew what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, they were both exactly